Eastern Midlands Regional Assembly in Ireland, together with stakeholders from Northern Ireland, from Finland and from Scotland. And all 4 stakeholder groups were looking for a methodology to support their work in achieving the targets defined. Oh, I have to do this for the streaming, sorry. So all 4, wait, I have to close my computer. So all 4 stakeholder groups were looking for a methodology to support them with achieving the targets to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions that were defined by the EU Climate and Energy Framework, and the emissions to achieve the reduction of the greenhouse gas emissions with 40% in 2030. And the methodology should be simple, robust, consistent and comparable. The methodology developed by the project has been made available via a web application, or will be made available via a web application, which we called the GIA tool, the Greenhouse Gas Impact Assessment Tool. And the aim of this workshop is to present you the functionalities of this GIA tool. First, speaker will be Kimmo Sakari Lulugangas from the Tallinn University of Technology, and he's the QGASP project leader. And Kimmo will introduce the methodology and the GIA tool. Then we will have Travis O'Doherty from the Eastern and Midlands Regional Assembly in Ireland. And he's the lead stakeholder behind the QGASP targeted analysis. And he will shortly introduce the IRIS case. That was one of the pilot case studies used to test the tool methodology. After that, we will return to Kimmo again, who will show us the tool itself and how it can work for the IRIS case study. And then, of course, after this walkthrough of the tool, we are curious to know what Travis thinks of the functionalities of the tool and how we can use it. So we go back to Travis to give him some, ask him for some input on this. And after that, we can we will have some discussions, because of course we were also interested in how you think you can use the tool in your situation. I will now hand over to Kimmo, who will introduce us to the methodology of the greenhouse gas impact assessment. Kimmo, go ahead.
Thank you, Marion. I'm glad to be here today. Hello. Now I need this one to be able to start my presentation. So I'm representing here a team of Irish, Finnish, Estonian researchers. Professor Jukka Heinonen, also from Iceland University, was part of the team. So we had this kind of consortium to work on this assignment, which was very exciting, not very easy, but most exciting and interesting to work on. We are not quite ready, but I will show you a tool that can already calculate, and you get an idea what you would be able to do with that. First, I would like to hear, are you planners here, or are you greenhouse gas quantification experts? Because I can adjust my presentation a bit according to what is your main interest. Who is a planner? Right? Who is a greenhouse gas quantification expert? Okay, then I'll talk more about how planner can use the tool. Planner is actually the main user for the tool, so we call it a planner user, but I will talk about it very soon. Thank you. So I have 10 minutes for this. I will take you quickly through what the project was about. We did a lot of things. We did 4 baseline analyses for 4 pilot cases. We did methodological development together with an expert team, and now our IT team is putting together the tool. And we made a choice to make it an open source browser-based tool so that the code is available for anyone to develop further or adapt to their own uses, even change it if you like. If I briefly, first, well, these are the targets. So ambitious targets, something that should be applicable all over the Europe. And we know that there are forerunner cities, forerunner territories, countries developing these kind of tools all the time, but they often are based on national data that really cannot be taken as such to another country. And we had to develop something that is based on open European data. But yet at the same time, we are aware that whenever a city or a territory invites a consult to do a baseline analysis or inventory, they are not actually using these European datasets. They are searching for local data that they consider more accurate. So this was one dilemma that we had to solve. If we just produce a tool that operates with pan-European datasets, nobody would like to use it because they think, and they are right, that they have available more accurate local data that reflects the emissions better than what we can gather from Eurostat and other European datasets. And at the same time, we should make it easy to any territory or city to start using it, planners to start using it without prior expert knowledge on the topic, just to test a bit where we are with our emissions if we don't have a baseline analysis done already. So these kind of problems were crucial for us, and I hope that we've been able to address that with the tool development. And one difficulty here is this inter-regional, inter-municipal comparisons. And I will explain why this is a difficult thing. These are our stakeholders: Finland, UK, Ireland, and then service providers here. I will move on quickly so that I can focus on the main content. There's a lot of variation in calculation methods. As you know, kind of informal standard for this is the greenhouse gas protocol, but it doesn't exactly define how you should calculate the emissions. And there are academic research papers stating that, for example, the emissions of Copenhagen, Stockholm, and Helsinki cannot really be compared. So we don't have that kind of harmonization yet that we could simply take to the tool and say that we are now applying the state-of-the-art method and turning it to a simple tool. That's what we like to argue. And at the same time, our understanding of the situation was that we are in the verge of methodological change as well. Because there are already forerunner cities like Edinburgh or Scotland. Government of Sweden was talking about it. Environmental organizations are talking about it. We should have more comprehensive understanding on the greenhouse gas emissions caused by our consumption, not only within the territory or within the country, but the global footprint of our consumption. So at the same time, when the first cities are close to the deadline that they'd set themselves for reaching carbon neutrality, for example, Copenhagen 25, we already see that there would be a need for more extensive analysis of greenhouse gas emissions that somehow track down the global emissions of our consumption. Okay, I will tell you how we responded to this finding. These are the two approaches that I'm talking about. Most of the cities and territories use this territorial approach. So we basically draw a boundary around the area, the city or territory. We try to calculate, assess the direct emissions of the area as Scope 1 emissions, as you may know, then indirect emissions, Scope 2, Scope 3. And this is actually not a method, it's an approach. And this is the same approach that they use for national inventories of greenhouse gas emissions. But when we take it to a smaller scale than a nation, there are some difficulties over here. Consumption-based approach would be the one where we allocate the emissions not to a geographic area, but the resident of an area. And no matter where the emissions occur, we will allocate these emissions to him or her. And this is now the new approach that we would like to see also in this tool and would be welcomed by many environmental activists. And actually, the recent guidelines of the C40 cities say that we should do both. We should do the territorial analysis, but also look into the consumption-based emissions. Okay, these are the case studies, and this kind of explains the problem with the territorial approach. We are after something that could provide results that can be compared. Now, these are results from our case study. Can we now say that Rathling is actually doing fantastic work in greenhouse gas mitigation? Can we say that Edinburgh, they should actually do much more? No, we don't, because territorial quantification always reflects the intensity of activity within the geographic boundary that we select. So it just happens that Edinburgh is a transportation hub of northern UK. Really a lot of transportation happening within the boundaries of Edinburgh. And the result actually reflects that intensity more than the success of climate action. So it would be really difficult to say that you can compare your results. It just happens that non-residents drive a lot in some area, and in another area like Rathlin Island, there's basically no other transportation than what the residents do when they enter their home and leave back to work, take a ferry to the mainland and so on. So this is the difficulty. To say that we can compare the results, we have to introduce some kind of new take on the methodology as well. This is an example. This is Estonia, where I currently work. I'm Finnish, but I work in Estonia. And this explains the territorial approach to transport emissions, the results that I just showed, in this case in Estonia. If I start driving from Tallinn, I drive south towards Latvia. I visit my friends in Latvia and drive back. Then the driving inside the boundaries of Estonia are included in the transport greenhouse gas emissions of Estonia, but the other part not. Then there's some stranger coming with his car from Europe and drives through Estonia. We don't know who he is. Then he continues to Helsinki with the ferry, and this driving is also included in territorial emissions. And now this is another difficulty we have to overcome. It's a combination of residents and non-residents doing transportation in the area. And if we apply a planning policy, it's most likely the residents that are mostly affected by a planning policy. And maybe less affected are the ones who come from outside and just happen to drive through the area. And also for this reason, the territorial approach is very difficult to compare in results. Then we have land use sector, where the key finding maybe is that most of the territories are using the IPCC methodology that is based on 6 land use categories. And when we take the 6 land use categories into cities or territories, we can easily see that this is not enough for cities or territories. There's one category called settlements. And now when we go to the city, everything is settlement. But we know when we look at the city, there are greener areas, there are concrete neighborhoods that have no green at all. There are differences, of course, in urban environments. So the resolution of the 6 IPCC categories definitely is not enough for smaller scale examinations. This is something that we were not able to address in here. We are applying the IPCC methodology with 6 categories, because that's the state-of-the-art method to assess the land use change impacts on climate and greenhouse gas emissions. But this is definitely a field that we would like to see some developments of more fine-grained analyses for cities and territories for the land use changes. And when you bring the 2 analyses together, this is an exception. Sometimes they are in line. These are our 4 case studies and consumption-based results and territorial results. They are slightly different things always. For consumption-based emissions, we track down the global emissions of the residents of Meath, Edinburgh, Rathlin and Kymenlaakso. I will explain later how. And then in territorial emissions, we were looking at the geographic boundaries of these areas and buildings' energy consumption in them. Sometimes they are in line like here, with the exception of Kymenlaakso, but in most cases we get 2 different perspectives on the emissions. And with our tool, we would like to provide both. So we have 2 calculators in one tool. You can have the both perspectives on the emissions and see if your planning policy has an impact on the global carbon footprint of the residents, or if it more has an effect on territorial emissions that are based on geographic boundary. Okay, in the tool we have 2 modes, 2 calculation modes, 2 approaches, and maybe a new feature is this consumption-based calculation. It is not new in academic research papers, but I haven't seen that in tools, because it's very difficult to trace down those emissions that are caused. We don't know where. Probably my laptop was produced in China, so that caused emissions, they should be allocated to me, not to China, if we follow the consumption-based calculation. And here are the two modes. One thing that we wanted to do to make this future-proof was that we made it modular. It causes some inconvenience when you have to answer to the questions, to the inputs for the tool, but we would like to see this as something that starts developing. If there are experts who think that our method wasn't very good, they have a better method, they can write over it, they can create a new module, propose it to ESPON, and they can update. So certain independency of the sectoral modules we wanted to have. These are developing rapidly, and we can already see that, for example, this land use change module should be updated. So we try to make it possible. We made it open source. Anyone can access the code. I will give you the address today. You can have a look at the code. We wrote it in Python. That is one of the most common languages that you can use for writing a code. And we also publish it in Excel. And all that to make it as easy and convenient as possible for any territory or city to start quantifying the greenhouse gas emissions with the help of our expert team. It would be really nice to have a kind of a platform for comparing the results, but maybe our power is not enough to create that kind of platform. But if we can create some kind of common language that produces something that is comparable, then I think we've already achieved a lot. So this is the structure for the territorial, which most of the cities and territories do. We cannot leave it out because cities would find it weird, territories would find it weird that they cannot do the practice that most of the territories now do. But we also have this consumption-based mode, which is based on so-called extended environmental input-output method that utilizes the Exio-based matrix and household budget surveys. And with this information, we can trace down the global emissions of the residents of the area. And here are the three users that we kind of identified for the tool. The basic use is intended for planner user. So we assume that the user knows a lot about the area that she or he is working on. She has to know, but there is no need to have any expert knowledge on the greenhouse gas quantification. But you need to know how many residential units you have. You need to know something about transport volumes and so on. And then we can have the results. And this was one of the very important findings in our project, that in many planning practices kind of lack this kind of numeric target setting. Many planning policies say that we have to increase the active modes of transport, but there is no indication how much. If we implement this policy between, say, 25 and 30, what is the expected change that we want to see as a result of this planning policy? And it would be actually great impact if we could send this message to planners that if you intend to apply this kind of climate action and achieve something, please also set the numeric target, quantitative target. What would you like to achieve? Is it minus 5%? Is it 3%? So if you have this, then you can also quantify the greenhouse gas emissions. But if it's missing, then we kind of leave this for the person who does the quantification to guess. So there's a lot of assumption over there. But if a planning policy could identify it or give a range that we aim to have an impact of 2 to 5% as a consequence of this policy, that would be great. And that would also help to then monitor the development. Did we achieve the target? Oh, yes, and the other users, expert user, I will explain this function. This is our response to the fact that the local data tends to be more accurate than European data. We created a functionality called local dataset. So you can create, basically this works for 32 countries, 32 European countries. You can select your country, do the calculation and get the result very easily. And I will show you how with just a couple of inputs you get the baseline for your area. But there's certain inaccuracy with this result, because we know that we would have in our bookshelf or in our laptop more accurate data on transport or buildings or emission factors, and they are not there in Eurostat data. We wanted to create the functionality that you can feed it in, and you can use the most accurate data that you can find to use this tool. And this is what we call a local dataset. So with an expert user, you can create country number 33, and it could be called Meath, or it could be called Copenhagen. It could be based on Danish or Irish data, but you make it more accurate by typing over the data that you have. And after that, you can continue doing the quantification, but your results are as accurate as it can be, because you are using the best available data for that. And developer user is the one who can rewrite the code and change the interface and so on. Now I need to speed up a bit. This is the diagram showing the idea. So we are doing the baseline and policy impact, 2 phases. I will demonstrate that in a tool better. This is how the tool looks like right now. As you see, it's not quite polished yet, but it kind of engine is there, it works. And I will go back to that later. Very briefly about the methods. Transport based on the very basic calculation, transport activity multiplied with the emission factor. We break down the road transport into factors like driving profile. Emission factors are different if you drive in a city or in the countryside. And propulsion of the cars. We are using Eurostat data to take into consideration what is the fuel that you are using in different countries, and you can adjust that data as well. And the emissions are calculated for car, bus, tram, metro, train, road, rail, inland waterways. One special feature is that we found no data set about European tram systems and their transport activity. We made it ourselves. We calculated all the tram systems and metro systems of Europe and estimated the transport activity in those, and now you can include them if you like, or part of them if you like. So this is something that is an additional bonus in this tool. And the difficult thing, but very crucial for the planning, is the future projection, because we don't want to look in the past like inventories do, but we should look to the future. So we chose to work with the time span that you select until 2050 and try to make a future projection of the emissions for each sector. And this is now by default based on this publication, EU Reference Scenario 2015, that basically gives us the expected future development by sector based on this primes modeling. You may ask, why didn't we use the EU Reference Scenario 2020? Because it doesn't share these future developments as percentages. And we were only operating with open data that is free of charge and available for all countries. That would be one improvement if those would be published in the future so that everybody could use it. And again, when you calculate with this primes model future scenario, you may notice that we expect much better development in the future than this tool now says. You can insert your own future projection through this local dataset function. Okay, then land use change. This is based on the IPCC categories, 6 of them, and 5 carbon pools, and we've included all the carbon stock change factors of the newest national inventory reports to IPCC into the tool. So whatever you calculate is based on newest knowledge that countries give to the IPCC inventories. Only with the deforestation data, we replace some of the NIR report data with the FAO data that is more accurate. When you fell down the forest, we get better results with this. And we give some examples how you can use GIS, for example, to quantify different land use types in your area, because it might be difficult if you want to be accurate. Cannot stop there, unfortunately. Then with the buildings, we are using EU buildings database. And there are 4 apartment types, 6 commercial building types, and also again with local data set you can rename them. If I come from Finland, for example, we don't have terraced houses. I can write there my own building type. If I know the energy consumption of the building type, I can tailor it for myself. And finally, consumption-based approach based on Exio-based matrix and household budget survey. So we are kind of tracking down the global emissions using the data on household consumption, how that's divided between different industries. And we get really holistic understanding of the total emissions around the globe using this method. And yes, future perspectives of this development. I will very briefly address this question. There has been many initiatives to harmonize developments of greenhouse gas quantification. We know that there are European standards on carbon footprint assessment of buildings, for example. TC 350 committee did excellent work. And yet today, if we look at the greenhouse gas quantification systems for buildings in Norway, Sweden, Denmark and Finland, they are different. So we have an excellent standard, and yet the national systems are very different from each other. It didn't quite work as it was supposed to be, but we have then a levels framework. So if you want to have comparable results, you have to quantify the emissions from your building with levels system that then provides this pan-European language for emissions, and then the results are comparable. So it could be that a tool like this can take the role of the levels quantification, produce results that are comparable to some extent, whereas we might not be able to really change the national systems and city systems as they do it nowadays. But there are good examples of practices that have really penetrated the practices of planning in European countries, like SEA, Strategic Environmental Assessment, that is applied in all European countries. But we've also recognized some data gaps and needs for harmonization, also methodological development. These are maybe tasks for research organizations and universities to tackle in the future. But there are gaps here. We should really develop them to be more accurate. You know, when city commits to, or territory commits to carbon neutrality, it also commits to quite big costs in form of offsets. And now if the quantification is not exact, there's a risk that it's unnecessarily expensive. From Estonian perspective, our main interest would be to also look into the new digital developments. You may know that in Estonia we have a countrywide digital twin available now. All the buildings of Estonia are on one digital model. And the digital twin is not only a 3D model, it's also an access to all the data sets that are relevant. So now if you imagine that the building object in here would include the information on the energy consumption, maybe theoretical and measured. Maybe the road carries the information on the transportation for buses, cars, bikes, and so on. If so, we can basically draw our territorial line anywhere and quantify the greenhouse gas emissions inside that boundary. And that gives us total freedom to choose the scale and do that in any geographical limits that we choose to work on. This is one opportunity to take it further. And of course, with this consumption-based, there's a lot of work to be done. This is a first attempt to take a method that is mainly used in academic research into a tool and provide also this consumption-based result available for the planners to use. And that was my last slide. Now I give the mic back to Marianne. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimo, for the explanations. I would now like to go to Travis to ask him to explain a little bit the IRIS case that is being used to test the methodology, and also maybe explain shortly why you were interested in the results of this project. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I hope everyone can hear and see me okay. And thanks, Marjan, and thanks, Kimo, for excellent presentations. So maybe a little background first. Background on, so we're the lead stakeholder, the Eastern and Midland Regional Assembly. And the whole idea for the project actually came about originally from one of our elected members, one of our politicians, who told us about this. ESPON had this call for a targeted analysis, and that it would be good to do something in terms of measuring greenhouse gases of development plans and regional plans. So so I wrote the application form originally, and we found partners. We'd worked with Kaiman Laakso in Finland on a few networks. We had good contacts there. And Northern Ireland, of course, was someone we worked closely with, and we're looking at that corridor from Belfast to Dublin. So having a Northern Irish partner on the project was great bonus. And then Scotland, of course, Scotland had done some previous work. They have this space model, which was developed quite a few years ago, and they had some expertise in the area. So we really wanted to get Scotland on board. So we wrote the application form. We'd no prior experience in ESPON, and we were lucky it was approved, and we were very successful. And so actually my colleague, I need to thank my colleague Nikki Nolan, who so when I wrote the application form, I then moved to a different role, and Nikki is the one that actually implemented the activities of the project for EMRA. So Nikki did the work, and I've come back into this role right at the end of the project, so to take all the credit for Nikki's hard work. So she really needs to get an acknowledgement, and So just a little bit about the motivation. So we're the Eastern Midland Regional Assembly. There's three, at the NUTS 2 level, there's three assemblies, regions in Ireland. And we, of course, have Dublin, the capital city, and we're the most populated of the three regions. And there's 12 local authorities or municipalities within our region. And we have our main policy document. We have this regional spatial economic strategy. It's a major strategy for development of the whole region for up to 2031. So it includes economic development, environmental development, population targets for different towns and areas in the region, environmental targets. But it's a major strategy, and local authorities then doing their development plan for a local area, they have to take into account our regional strategy. But, and of course, we also have our environmental targets. You know, Ireland has to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 51% by 2030 and be net zero by 2050. But we don't have a method, we didn't have a method of measuring the greenhouse gas emissions of plans, of spatial plans. So either our regional plan or the local, the 12 local plans that make up the municipalities of that region. So that was why we put together this proposal, why we were so interested in leading it and being the lead stakeholder, and why it's great for our region. And so we work closely with all the municipalities, but we selected one particular municipality, Meath, to be at the case study in this project. And we selected Meath because they're very active. They have their own climate plan, and they have a good team of planners there that are interested, they're engaged. We have a good relationship with them. We work closely with them. It's a good case study, and so we work closely with Meath and in the various testing and piloting of the tools. And of course, one of the service providers is Codema, the energy agency in Dublin, and we've a good relationship with them. We've worked closely with them before, so having those local contacts, was key for us. That was really important. So in terms then of the actual the quantification, so as I said, previously there was no method to measure the greenhouse gas emissions of spatial plans, and as kind of Kimo mentioned earlier, a lot of these spatial plans don't have. They're more aspirational. They're more general targets for improving the environment, or so it can be difficult to take out aspects of that plan and measure the greenhouse gas emissions associated with it. But that's something it's very important that we really need to do. And so we work very closely with Meath on that. And so Meath. So each municipality has their county development plan, and that's what we focused on for this project. So the development plan is the development of the area. So it's got zoning of land, say for residential use, for industrial use, for recreational use. The population targets of individual areas. It's environmental targets, and it's the policy objectives over the period of the plan. And the plans are 6 years in duration, so they're really important for the development of an area. So it's a major. The development of a development plan takes 2 years to develop. So it's a huge piece of work. But as I said, there's no method for measuring the greenhouse gas emissions of that plan. So there was various workshops with Meath in applying the tool. And as Kimo said previously, there's a lot of local data sets that we were able to feed into the tool. So the municipality has access to very, very good local data. For example, on buildings, the building energy ratings, the type of buildings, the area of buildings, really detailed data. In terms of transport, the municipality does their own surveys of transport volumes and transport patterns. So there's lots of local data that the municipality can input into this model in order to refine it, as Kimo said. So it was a great opportunity for them to really think about how they want to bring all these data sets together in the model and get as accurate an assessment as possible for the greenhouse gas emissions of the area. So Meath is just a little bit of background in Meath. It's outside of Dublin. It's It's more, there's a mixture of rural areas and urban areas. But it's heavily influenced by Dublin. So a lot of people would live in Meath and commute to Dublin. So going back to what Kimo mentioned, there's the territorial quantification, the consumption-based quantification. So it was very good that the tool incorporates both. And as Kimo said, there's a lot of work still to do. It's very much a work in progress, but it's a great start for us. And previously, it addresses a big gap that we had. And if it works in Meath, in the pilot in Meath, it can be developed for all the 12 municipalities within our region, and then the regional strategy, of course. And we're talking to the national government. There's a national planning office, the office of the planning regulator, who are very interested in the tools, and so we talk regularly to them. So with a view to a wider rollout nationally, and so that the three, the buildings, land use, and transport, that those three sectors are very important. And there's a lot of what the tool was able to do was look at the policies of the plan and say, so this policy will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by a certain amount. This policy will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by a certain amount. So you could see where the biggest gains can be got. So that's a major area. So to go through some of the policies that were quantified, say the building sector, there's objectives in the development plan to improve the energy efficiency of the building stock. So the tool could look at if the building stock was raised to a certain energy efficiency level, how much greenhouse gas emissions that would save. And then different technologies, if heat pumps were employed, what effect would that have, or solar, or what would the effect of different technologies be? And how that would help us meet our greenhouse gas targets, and district heating systems, how they would impact on our targets, and then new dwellings. So the additional new dwellings would be, of course, much more energy efficient, and how that would affect the overall stock of buildings in the region. Changes to space heating, changes to building use, and so we were able to quantify quite a few policies within that plan. Similarly, in transport, provision of additional public transport, rail, and what effect that would have on the figures, and the modal share, changes to the modal share. And we saw, as Kimo presented earlier, some comparisons between the different case studies was difficult. But I think what would be great value, we have 31 in Ireland, 31 local authorities, and if this tool could provide excellent comparison between the local authorities in Ireland as to show the variations in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, and so within Ireland it could be very, of course we only tested in Meath, but for wider rollout it could be very useful. And similarly, land use, we have access probably to data sets that are more local data sets than the EU data sets. So it's very good in that respect. So I'm going to talk later about the general reflections on the usefulness of the tool, but I think I'll hand back now to Marjan and Kimo to take through more of the details of the tool. So thank you.
Thank you, Travis, for the explanations and the reasons why you were interested in this tool. I would like to give back to Kimo to go a little bit through the tool, maybe just 5 minutes, and then we can...
Sure. Now I need to probably push something to get this view over there.
Yeah, did you push this one?
Let's push it again. Thank you. Yeah. Now, this is the embarrassing part of my presentation. I would love to say that the tool is ready and I can demonstrate all the parts of it. It should have been ready. We are late with our schedule. Just doing all this research and method development and everything was too much. And what is happening right now, that we have a team of 5 master students of software engineering, and 2 PhD students writing the code. Some of them parts are ready, some of them are not. And as you see, also the graphics is not quite finalized yet, but we have the functionality there. So I will show you what kind of inputs we kind of assume or expect the planner to do to get the results. And hopefully I can prove that quite little is needed to get the baseline scenario from selected year towards 2050 when Europe wants to be carbon neutral. This was our ambition, that just some clicks and you get the baseline scenario. And then you can display the policy impacts against the baseline scenario. Are we doing better or worse if we do this? So very briefly, this is where you get, if you type into the browser ggia.ulno.net, you are free to do that. You are welcome to see this version anytime you want. We have a development version next to it, and whenever something is ready, we will bring it in here. And we do hope that within a couple of weeks, all of it is in there. On the blue tone, you see the territorial quantification. We do hope that these modules will increase in number in the future, but most important emissions are already now included. And on red, we have the novelty, the new feature, the consumption-based quantification. And let's start and let's see what happens. Probably some really awkward columns will appear or something will go broken, as in the demo always, but I'll try to do my best. We were planning to have the support of Professor Ulrich Norbisrath, who is leading this IT team here, but unfortunately he had to take over the chairperson duty in the Defense Committee in Tartu University, so he wasn't able to join us today. Okay, but whatever we calculate, we first need to do these choices. We need to select the year from where our study starts. Let's keep it 22. We need to select the country, and for Ireland, it's of course here. We had 32 countries here included. Now it went to Italy. Let's not do that. Let's do Ireland. And now this is the local data set, which can have basically unlimited number of local data sets. In this case, we promised that there will be meat also in the end. So the 4 case studies will be there as examples, what you can do. They could be smaller municipalities. They could be, you could basically build up a new data set for Ireland as well. If you're not happy with our data set, you do new, name it Ireland official, and anyone can use it. It's available for anyone, and then it gives you the most accurate basic data that you can use, that you can find, because it's given by the local authorities. And then the population, I'll put now 195,000. I cannot remember exactly if this is an accurate figure for Meath, but roughly right. And then we save it, and we start the calculation. And let's see what happens next. Can I scroll down with this system? That one I don't need, but I would need to get to the next page. Let's start with this new thing, consumption-based. So I will now put in some random figures so that we can get the results. So these might not exactly match with the description of Meath, but I will show you how we get the baseline. And baseline means the emissions as they would be if we apply no additional policies or measures to reduce the emissions. What we kind of are looking at if we don't do anything. So I'll choose here 0. If I leave it 0, it uses the default value, and I will leave them like this. And with these choices only, we get the baseline scenario from selected year to 2050. I know graphics should be smaller, look more elegant, but we have the engine running. And this is done with a very serious methodology using this XYZ-based matrix. So we have high ambition here. I do hope that we can make it user-friendly and intuitive in the end. But the engine is there and provides us results with just a couple of clicks. And now this is the development that is already developing towards better. These are emissions. So the smaller the number is in the end, the better. We would like it to dive deeper quickly so that we can offset the emissions by having some negative figures, but it costs. So we would first like to cut the emissions as much as possible. And what we can do next is we can start testing different planning policies if they would make an improvement in this curve. This is now based on the primes modeling. There might be more accurate Irish data saying that our curve is actually much better already now. And for that, again, you should use the local data set to have it displayed in here. And let's see if I can take you further in here. We get also the numeric data, which doesn't look that fancy right now, but it's quite accurate. And this type of questions we now ask about the planning policy. One challenge that we had is that in where I come from, Finland, plan is a drawing. We make a drawing, that's a plan. But when we go to some other countries, planning documents are written text, and we should be able to operate in both. So this is a set of questions, some of them numeric, some of them more like descriptive, where we apply some policies, estimate their impacts, often in numeric way, but in the end they are all converted into greenhouse gas emissions. And what is important, each policy is, there's a timing for it. So in the end you can say that this is we plan to have from 2027 to 2030, and then it kind of displays that impact over those years. And there can be multiple policies implemented on the same curve all the time. And once you do the baseline once, you can always return to that. You only have to do the baseline once, and then you can always return to that and test new policies and plans over that. I'll feed now something random here because I have some real figures here too, but I want to show you also some other modules. So let's see what I can put in. So again, I time here something, and this is new population coming in. Let's say that Meath will have 100,000, no, that would be quite much. Let's say 25,000 new residents. And I will just put some random figures in here with the risk of having really weird graphs in the end. And then let's see if we can get some results already with these. Here we can select if the policy has an impact on biofuel supply, electric vehicles share, or modal shift. Then we click and it opens, and then we can fill in. But if your policy don't have an impact on those, then you can just skip and get the result. And here we see it had some impact. The results are per capita. That's why the new residents coming into the area doesn't increase the emissions. In absolute emissions, it does that. But the new residents in the area will be living by default high energy rated buildings, and that's why the total emissions would be reduced against the baseline. Again, the graphics is a bit drafty, but we get the results quickly for the planner so that we can test what if I do this, will it have a better positive impact or negative impact on the results. I'll take you quickly to some other module just to show you an example how it works. Let's try buildings module here. Now I have some real numbers here from Meath. There were two kinds of case studies that we did. Kymenlaakso and Edinburgh have a baseline study already, very good inventory and action plan for the areas. So we were able to compare our results against them. But Meath and the fourth case study, they didn't have any point of comparison, so we did the first baseline analysis for these areas. And the thing is that if you have to use a consult to do this baseline analysis or inventory for your area, that costs a lot of money. So we try to bring this impact quantification closer to the planner so that you don't need to have the consult first doing the baseline study. And you can directly test this by yourself to see, what if I do this, will it for better or for worse? I will put in now some figures from our baseline analysis. These should be real numbers from Meath. Sorry that I don't remember them by heart. This much you need to know, so the tool doesn't know what you have inside your area before you do these inputs. But by giving these descriptions, we can start calculating. Now we are on territorial side, so this is the common practice of doing greenhouse gas quantification. We get some results. We are doing quite well because in many demos we get no results, but this should be working. Now let's see what we get with these figures. Submit. And next. There you go. So this is a baseline study. The emissions from energy use of buildings in this area based on these numbers that you gave. And the declining tendency comes again from the PRIMES model future projection or prognosis on the developments, mainly because we assume that the grid electricity emission factor will reduce, and electricity has an impact on emissions in all sectors, basically. And most of the countries have their own scenarios that are quite ambitious, more ambitious than the PRIMES model. And again, you can feed that in through the local dataset, and then you have the most recent prognosis on the grid electricity implemented in your local study. And how it would continue in here, I won't have time to display policy quantification, but the idea can be seen here. We ask these kind of things. Are there new developments, for example? How many new this is densification, sorry. This would be, let's see if I can show an easier example. Maybe this one, or even the residential buildings in here. So if we plan a new settlement, in here we should feed in the number of new residential units, apartments, terraced houses, semi-detached houses, and detached houses. We should describe here when we assume that they would be built. This would be the first year when we assume that people would be moving in. So no time for that's not the time for construction. That's when we start using the buildings. And this is when this number of buildings is assumed to be ready. And then if we have a policy that there will be a significant amount of renewable energy that they build in those houses, say 5% of their energy consumption comes from their on-site PV panels, for example, that can be included in here. And with these 4 inputs per one residential building type, we get already some results, how much that would, what kind of impact that would have on the local emissions in this territory. So always there's a timing, some kind of quantification, but not as expert terms of greenhouse gas quantification, but rather in units that the planner is more familiar with. Now I'm afraid I will have to close here. I'm excited about this, so I would love to talk more about the solutions that we are developing, but I do hope that this gave you an idea of what we are working on. On the start page of the tool site, there's a video that gives you an overall presentation of the tool. And then there's a rather detailed manual that can be also found in this site when it's ready. So we do hope that planners would like to use it. And as you can see, you get first results very quickly. But then when it gets more serious, you have to decide about investments and take it to the decision makers. Then you might want to have the local data sets, and then they are also reliable. They are accurate.
Thank you, Kimo, for the explanations. And showing a bit of the inside of the module. We first go back to Travis. Are you there? Yes.
Yeah. Hi.
Well,
Hi.
Your reflections, please.
Yes, I'll keep it very brief. So the tool has there's some great functions in the tool. What Kimo presented there, the baseline analysis. So it projects the emissions in the future, and so for us, every 6 years there's a new the municipalities have to do a new development plan. So I suppose we can look at 2 things. We can look at when the plan finishes, we can look at retrospectively how effective was that plan at reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Did it fulfill its objectives? And then we can look at future plans and how they will impact on our greenhouse gas emissions. And I think I suppose a good thing about the tool is how you can input data as the situation changes on the ground. So Kimo showed there new housing developments, for example. So when they are occupied, you can input that into the tool to get figures for greenhouse gas emissions, but also other policies that reflect on the plan. So if there's a new transport policy, a new piece of public transport infrastructure, then you can input that into the tool and see what effect that has. So that's very, very interesting. I suppose within the municipalities in Ireland, there isn't that much expertise. We have the planning team are non-technical users. We don't in the municipalities have that much kind of expert users or developers. But one of the service providers was Codema, and they do have some expertise in development, and so that's that's a very good partner on the project. And I mentioned earlier that there's a national office of the planning regulator are very interested in the tool, because they oversee planning in Ireland. They oversee the municipalities. So they're very interested in a tool that can compare the greenhouse gas emissions of different development plans and regional plans and even national plans. So they're very interested in it. So there's some work to do, but I think there's some great benefits and some great ideas there. And as new modules come on board, and as the tool is refined and the user guide is finished, then we can have some really good outputs from that. So it can be a great benefit, and if it's working in the other cities as well, the other partners, the other stakeholders in ESPON. So testing it in very different situations at different scales is it's a challenge, but it's really testing the functionality of the tool. So I think we're very positive about it, but it can definitely fill a gap that we need.
Thank you, Travis. Yes, as said, the project is still running and making some finalizations of the tool, so it's not completely ready. And we are very much looking forward also in the new program to take this up and test it in additional regions and cities. For the few people that are left, do you have any questions or comments? Do you see any possibility to use it in your regions or cities? I was curious to learn about that. And also, when we are planning to test it in the new program, we probably are also looking for other cities and regions with whom we can test it, and maybe you know or have ideas on which regions and cities that could be. Any ideas on that? No?
I can just say it seems quite a promising tool, and of course useful for our municipalities as well as Estonian municipalities also elaborating their climate adaptation plans instead of the spatial planning documents. And I think this kind of tool can support the elaboration of these climate adaptation plans, and of course the implementation, to monitor their implementation as well. Quite promising one, yeah, but I can't have any idea about concrete potential municipalities who are willing to test this tool. But I'm very willing to introduce this opportunity for our municipalities in Estonia, and maybe we can find many interested ones. And I only had one question when you presented this tool. I couldn't see if there was an option to when you enter new buildings, your plan, your new apartment buildings, was there also an option to consider the different energy consumption rates of different buildings? As we know that we are building zero energy consumption buildings or not zero energy consumption buildings. These kind of differences should be also taken into account in the tool. Then that's the question, maybe.
That's a very good question, and we had to do some simplifications, and now we assume that new buildings are A-rated, and in local dataset you can adjust this, what is the default for new buildings per building type. But for a planner user, this option doesn't now exist. What we do have is we have a policy option where we can retrofit buildings from D class to A class or B class to A class and whatever class you have. And we have an opportunity for conversions. So if industrial buildings are converted into apartments, for example, this can be quantified. But with the new buildings energy efficiency level, no, we don't have that. We would basically have the data for that. So maybe this would be also a question for further development to use the data that we collected in a more diverse and meaningful way in the future, that there are more options that then by the use turn out to be important for the planners. I was just telling to Marian during the coffee break that we basically know only after 1 year, when planners have used that, what is important function and what is totally irrelevant. Now we can make an educated guess, but it could be also that in different parts of Europe, different policies would be favored. For example, depending on local situation. In Estonia, for example, the grid electricity has high carbon intensity, so any policy that reduces that and increases renewable energy share would be very welcome. Then there are countries where the grid electricity is almost zero emission. Then they, of course, the policies also emphasize different things, or the different policies have the best impact. But this was a good comment that could be easily added. We have now, our data is, we first built it up in this kind of Excel that collected all the modules and calculation methods, and we have some 800 data rows for 32 countries, so that's quite extensive, but yet a result of simplification. So most difficult part of this was to decide where to simplify and what to keep in to have enough accuracy. And it may be that in some cases we have dropped out something that would be really important for the planner user, just to simplify it, and maybe included some features that then in practice turn out to be unnecessary or nobody will use them. But we do hope that there would be round 2 with the tool, maybe with someone else or us, whoever takes over and makes it better.
Thank you for the explanation. I will now close the session because we are already 25 minutes over time. And I thank you very much for your attention. And yeah, as soon as we are able to publish the tool, we will send around in the ESPON newsletter also the link, and then you can investigate yourself further. Thank you.